Hey there, I'm Michael, and welcome to my very first in-person explanation video. And I'm excited to do way more of these. I know there's several topics I want to get into, which I know we're kind of getting into creation of Christianity here, but that's not all I'm gonna do. So sorry if that's what you're looking for. I'm gonna do plenty of that stuff, but I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna explain the history of Rainforest Cafe or stuff like that. Just random stuff, really. It's gonna be fun though. So if you're interested in all that stuff, subscribe. Just consider it. It's something I really am interested in, and I'm excited to further my career in. So, without that, you actually came here to learn about the creation of the world from a Christian viewpoint. So, where I'm actually getting these days of creation that I'm going to explain later, this all comes from the Christian Bible, and I know there's different religions that have a basis around this. I know it's the Muslim tradition has something similar to what the Bible says, the Christian Bible, but it's slightly tweaked. They started in heaven and then came down to earth as their punishment. But like I said, we're not going to get into that deep dive of other religions. I know there's thousands of religions and each have their own creation story. But I'm going to be specifically giving you the explanation of what Christianity says about the creation of the universe. Now, again, I'm not going to be trying to persuade you to believe this because we're all grown people here and you can make your own decisions about things. But I'm just going to simply explain to you what the Bible says, and you can take that information as you will. Do whatever you want with it. But that's what my goal is here, is to actually persuade you. Now, there's a few things I want to go over before we actually get into the creation of the universe and the world as we know it. And that's what becomes or is created before the universe. Sorry about that. So if you want to know what happens before the universe, and it's kind of complicated, because if you want to get into deeper things such as the devil and Satan, which I could get into way later, I can make a whole video on that, on Eden, because if you know, the devil is in the Garden of Eden, which is God's paradise, and he eventually tricks Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, to sin. And you might want to wonder, how was the devil even in the garden? Did he exist before the world? And that's, true. I'm going to say this right now. Heaven most likely exists alongside God the whole time. Now, this is something I'm just going to mention so it makes sense a little more. In the Christian religion, God has always existed and will always exist. So, the world and time itself is it's a hard kind of construct to understand, right? Because we kind of understand a day as the rotation of the sun, which is 24 hours, right? From sunset to sunrise, 24 hours. That's how we kind of get that day cycle, right? And we kind of as humans, we think of things chronologically, we need a start, we need a beginning, or a start and a beginning. We need a start and an end. But it's kind of more complicated than that, right? Because God is exists outside of time, if that makes sense. So he knows everything that's going to happen, everything that will happen, but he kind of chooses to be with us in this time, in this world he created that has a chronological order, but time isn't as cut and dry. And this isn't something that's just exclusive to Christianity, because I know even in the scientific belief, time is infiniteless. They believe the Big Bang, and if this is how you believe too, it's 100% understandable. But the Big Bang is all this stuff, all this matter just poof, came out of nowhere. And I'm not saying that's kind of where scientists are kind of confused. Why did just stuff exist out of nowhere? Why did it just explode into everything? But yeah, so they'll also agree that time is infiniteless, and Christians also believe that, but they believe that God exists outside of time and decided to just create man and the world. And there's deeper reasons for that, which you can find throughout all the Bible. And I definitely recommend going and reading this for yourself. So what we're actually going to be reading today is the very first chapter. It's the first thing you actually see if you ever open the Bible and you started reading. This is the first thing you'd actually read. This is what I'm explaining today. The first chapter of the Bible. And Genesis, which is the first book. Now, if you don't know how the Bible works, you get the Bible by itself. You have these books, which are I don't know how to explain it. It's a very small book. That makes sense. Some are larger than others. Some are only 4 chapters. And a chapter you're thinking of is not a chapter in the Bible. A chapter in the Bible is a page long, or maybe slightly over a page, but it's usually a page long. So it's not like that, but some books are 4 chapters, others are 50. Genesis, which is the book that we're gonna be reading today, is 50 chapters long, which again it's only 50 pages, so it's not even that much. So yeah, so sorry, I don't want to get into that, but how it works is basically you have the Bible, you got the books, and within a book you have verses, so you'll have chapters, and then you'll have the chapters of that book, and then within those chapters, there's verses which are certain sentences which are highlighted because they're combined together. So what we're reading today is Genesis 1, which is the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible, and we're reading the first chapter of Genesis. That makes sense. We're reading all of that. So chapter 1 of the Bible, basically, that makes sense. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to confuse you here. But yeah, and also, little fun fact, Genesis actually means, it's a Greek word meaning beginning or the beginning. So kind of cool because the book of Genesis is all about the creation of the world. And it's more on the traditions that we later find throughout the world and like how man expands across earth and all of that, which is like almost the entirety of the book. And only the first chapter is actually about the creation of the earth. Which leads to many debate over it, and I'm gonna go over that now because I know there's several debates over like important things that we need to get into. But like I said, now that you know how the Bible works and you know like how God kind of exists outside of time or has always existed. So if you ever wondered like who created God, or if that's like a question you had, no one created God. God's always existed. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but God has always existed, and He decided to create the earth. By simply saying things. So again, this is like how I'm going to explain this. Like God's going to like say something like He tells the earth to be created, and the earth is simply created. So like you can assume like it's pretty cool. Me, especially as me as a Christian, it's kind of cool like how to see something that's super powerful and then it's safe for something to be created, and it's created. Like I was like, ooh, Apple. There's not an I edit that in later. But yeah, but that is what is happening here. So if I'm gonna say like God created this, He said it and it was created. So pretty cool. So now that I have that all the way, we can actually start into this little journey and why you're actually here. So first thing to note is that many people like reference the 7th day of creation, the 7 days of creation, but it's actually only 6 because on the 7th day of creation, God actually rested. And it's not like He was like tired, if that makes sense, but it's kind of like His conclusion of creation. It's like, yeah, this is done. So if that makes sense, there's actually only 6 days He creates things. And yeah, there's also like a big dispute in Christianity over whether a day in the Bible is actually a day. So now, don't get me wrong. In the Bible, throughout the rest of the Bible, a day is pretty much a day. But since the only person that was there in creation was God and like the angels, and since this information was given to a prophet, or that's what the Christian people believe, is that God like give a prophet this information to write down. So we can assume that since God's the one giving the prophet this information, He was the only one there. We can't exactly say that what God says is a day isn't a day. And why that's disputed, let me pull it up over here, is because there's actually a verse that says like God's understanding is different than ours of time. Let me see if I can find this. Sorry, I'm over here researching while doing a video. Let's see. So the debate over this is whether a day at the beginning of the world, right? A day at the beginning of the world is 24 hours as we know it, or is much longer. Now, the reason why people dispute it over like whether God says this is like a 1 day of creation is longer than a day, there's several reasons pointing to like it's not actually a day, and there's several reasons pointing to it is actually a day, and I'm going to get into that right now. So there's a verse later in the Bible that says, let's see right here, 2 Peter 3:8, which says, "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." So kind of weird because like if for a God, his understanding of time, like again, He exists outside of time in the Christian faith, it's not the same as us. He's saying like a day in God's eyes is like 1,000 years. Like that's how fast it moves. So if someone says something like a day, like if God's saying like this is 1 day of creation, it could be 1,000 years. It says like 1,000 years, so it could be much longer than that. So many Christians like debate over whether that's way longer than 1,000 years or 24 hours. Now the evidence for it being like 24 hours, like a day that we know it, is at the end of every day of creation, God will say, "And there was evening, and there was morning," the first day, or whatever day it was, which again, if there's morning and evening, you assume it's 24 hours. But what is important to note is that the sun and the moon, which I will get to later, aren't created until day 4 of creation. So that would mean there isn't evening and morning as we know it in the first 3 days of creation, right? So if that doesn't make sense, either God, since God is omnipotent, knowing, meaning He knows the future, the beginning, like He knows what's going to happen. He either knows that all of humanity is going to know that a day is 24 hours throughout the rest of the time, or His understanding of a day is just different than ours. So it could be thousands of years that He's like creating this, and we're just assuming it's a day. It could be millions of years actually. We don't really know, or it could be 24 hours. So that's really the debate if 1 day of creation. So as I know, I'm going to call it 6 days, the 6 days of creation, as you saw in the title of this video. But again, it's debated in Christianity if this is actually 24 hours a day, or a symbolic day of thousands of years or hundreds of years, whatever you want to think. So yeah, that's kind of a debate in Christianity, and I kind of wanted to go over that, so you gave a you have a better understanding, and it might make a little more sense to you. So yeah, now that we have that, we can actually begin what you are here for, and that is starting the Christian creation of the world. Okay, so what the Bible says is that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, he's not referring to heaven when he says heavens, because it's plural. He's actually referring to the sky, or what we know as what we know as space today, and like that's everything that's above earth. So like that's the heavens. Like if I was like an ancient Greek philosopher, I was like, ooh, look into the heavens. I'm like saying like look up into the sky and into space. So yeah, he creates the heavens and the earth. So he actually creates earth, and he creates everything above that. So space basically. And on earth, he creates water and earth, or like earth, like dirt, and all the dirt and land is compressed under the water, as we say that like God's spirit like hovers over the waters of the earth, as it says in the Bible. And so basically, you have the earth. And there's like the core of it. Obviously, the core of the earth is still there, and there's all this land, but it's all covered by water. So that's pretty much the first day of creation. God also creates light, like not like the sun, but like the energy of light. And this is important because it says he creates light, right? But it doesn't say anything about him creating darkness, but it says darkness is there. So maybe we're assuming that without creation, or like the lack of creation, that there's just darkness everywhere. Or maybe that's what space is. Like we see space, right? We can't really explain what space is. It's just nothingness, right? So God creates light, which is pretty important, as we'll get into later. So God creates light on the first day, and he actually creates the heavens and the earth. And that's pretty important. But what becomes more important is on day 2 of creation. On day 2 of creation, God creates a breathable atmosphere. It says in the Bible that he separates the water that is on the face of the earth from the sky. So basically, he's creating that breathable atmosphere away from the heavens, as we got into later, which allows us to, breathe, because that's something you can't do on any other planet. So kind of important. And I know day 2 is like kind of like missed by Christians. Like if I ask like normal Christians, like, oh, what happened on day 2 of creation? I promise you 90% are not being able to tell you, oh yeah, an atmosphere. Like it's just a really weird day, but it's super important. And that's why I think day 2 is on a tier list of the days of creation in Christian belief. I would say it's pretty up there. It's really underrated. So with that, we get into day 3, where things get to be a little more important, and we get to the separation of land and water. So like I mentioned, all that land is under the water, and God then separates the land from the water, basically pulling the land up and separating it into oceans, or he says seas. But like what we know as a sea now is different than what a sea was back then. But it says here that God names it a sea, so technically we should be calling it a sea. Like the ocean should be a sea, and maybe we should call seas oceans. But that's just the dumb thoughts that go in my head. But anyways, so yeah, God kind of separates the land from the water. And the next thing that's really cool here is that God creates plants. And this is the first time we see plants, and that they can live on the atmosphere because of oxygen. But you might be remembering something here. The sun hasn't yet been created. So how do these plants survive? Well, it depends on what you believe on that time thing. So if you believe it's one day, you could just assume that the plants survive the day until the sun was created the next day. Or if you believe a day was like thousands of years, or like whatever time distance you want to believe, as I mentioned before, then you can assume that God used that like light energy that he created before to just like help them survive, because he's God. He can do what he wants. So that's where you can believe. You can either believe like God helped the plants to live, you would think it's a lot longer, or you can just think like, oh, he was like, yeah, it's only a day. So So yeah, that's day 3 of creation, and God creates the plants and all that. And day 4, as I mentioned before, is also really important. Again, I think this is really another really underrated day. I know most people think like, oh, he creates the earth, he creates plants, and then he creates animals. But you're forgetting days 3 and 4. 4, he creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. So basically, it was just earth, and then just space, or the heavens. Around earth. So now he creates all these stars, or like the planets we know, but like the stars that we still see out there today. We see those stars. So yeah, God creates the stars to like give light at nighttime and kind of help us to know what's night and what's day. And then he creates the sun and the moon, which again are really important. That gives us the tides, and the sun gives us all the energy we need and help the plants survive. So now there's actually a sun, which is really important. And again, God says that on this day, time was created. So like days, years were now be able to separate from each other, and seasons as well. So basically day 4 is when time as we know it kind of comes into existence. So again, day 4 is really underrated. You got the sun, you got the moon, you got time itself, seasons. yeah, if you're a winter fan, if you're a fall fan, a spring fan, day 4. Day 4. But anyways, that is pretty much day 4. The planets, everything around it, the sun, the moon, stars, all of that. So pretty cool. And now we get to day 5, where it gets a little more interesting. Day 5 is where we see like intelligent life. So that's birds and creatures that live in the water. So God says he creates everything that swims in the water. So we can assume this is like not just fish, but whales and anything else that lives in the water. So like water animals, basically. Like I said, like it's literally not that complex. You got the animals that live in the water. And then he said he also creates everything that lives in the sky. So which is like birds and bats or whatever flies. So all the flying creatures and all the swimming creatures are created on day 5. And I could go into more detail on that, but I think that's all you need. Day 6. Now this is where things get created. We're going to separate day 6 into 2 parts. We got the first part of day 6 and the bottom part of day 6, which we'll get into. But let's get into the first part. God creates every living creature that walks on dry land. So again, on day 3, God created dry land and the plants. And now as you can see, like creation is like progressing to help those that now survive on it. So the plants and all that were made. The plants were made to feed the creatures that were created on day 5, and now on day 6, there's dry land and all that. It's all preparing for itself. So it's kind of cool to see like the earth being prepared for these things that are going to come on. But anyways, on day 6, God creates every living animal in the dry land, and he kind of distinguishes these between like 3 categories. But it doesn't really matter because he says he creates all animals that walk on the earth. But because I am myself, I'm going to give you these 3 distinguished categories. He says there's livestock, there's creeping things, and the beasts of the earth. So livestock is what you're assuming livestock is, because that's what we still know it today. Livestock is like cows, cattle, anything you see on a farm, like pigs and all that. That would all be considered cattle. Then creeping things, like I'm pretty sure, and maybe this is the first thing that comes to my head, I'm thinking of like insects, and I'm almost sure that's what it's referring to here, is like insects, creeping things, maybe snakes, reptiles, and all that. And then finally you have the beast, which is just anything that's not insects or livestock, beast, anything else. Any other like wild animals, what it's referring to, wild animals. So yeah, so that's like the first summarization of day 6. And now we're going to get into the important part of day 6, as I like to call it. It's not really important, but if you consider yourself or humanity important, then you might like day 6. So on day 6, God created man not in his image, but in our image, as the Bible says. It doesn't say his image, it says our image. He said, let us go down and create man in our image, who is our. Now, this is like, again, sort of debated, but there's a pretty simple answer to it. Either God's referring to himself and the angels, because if he created the angels in heaven before the earth, then the angels probably look like God as well. So that is one possible solution. The other, if you know anything about the Trinity, which again, this is another kind of complex section, but you got God, right? Now God he has like extensions of himself, extensions of God, which are Jesus, which is like, if you know anything about Jesus, they call him the Son of God, but he's a direct connection to God. So like he's a part of God, basically. And then you have the Holy Spirit, which is a whole other deep dive. But anyways, God can be multiple things that are all God, but they're extensions of God, God's being. So with that, we could assume, which is really cool, that Jesus was there all along with God from the very beginning, and us as mankind, look like God, which is really cool. And I think that's really cool kind of detail there, is that we look like God. And yeah, so that's, if you're wondering what our plural is referring to, it's referring to either Jesus or the angels. I mean, either way, really cool. And so that if you ever wonder what God looks like, I wouldn't want to say he looks like us, because that's kind of like self-centered. We look like him, if that makes more sense. So yeah, we look like God. So if you wonder what God looks like, he looks like mankind. So yeah, mankind's created. And in Genesis chapter 2, it gets really more specific on this, like on the creation of man. Like Genesis 2 is kind of extension of the story of the 6th day, like explaining how Adam, which is the first man, was like created from the dust. Like God took dust of the earth and like breathed life into it, and Adam was created. And then he realized that Adam was lonely and like needed a helper in the Garden of Eden, which was God's paradise for humanity. So he puts Adam in a deep sleep and takes a rib from him and creates Eve. Like, he didn't have to do that, but it's really symbolic as we get to later, because in marriage, you're supposed, a man like leaves his father and goes out with his wife, and it's like God took a rib, like the rib left him, created his wife. So really cool. And if you ever heard like the expression ashes to ashes, which comes from the Bible, since man was created from ashes, we return to ashes when we die. That's where that phrase comes from. So yeah, with that is the creation of the earth from a biblical standpoint or Christian standpoint, whatever you want to see it. And yeah, I hope you like this video. I was really interested to give you the story, and I'm really excited to, further my explanatory, that's not a word, you know what I'm talking about, explanation videos. And I'm really excited to get into that. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing or putting a like down. I know it was a little rough for my first video, but I really hope you appreciate it. And I'll try to get a better background. I know you guys could probably have questions about that background, but for now, just ignore it. Just ignore it. But yeah, that's the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. I'm Michael. Goodbye.